instrument. The lute was well established in European musical culture by the 15th century, and it was also towards the end of the 15th century that people started playing the lute with their fingers rather than with a plectrum. And this gave rise to a new kind of notation specifically intended for the lute called tablature. And starting in 1507, a whole string of publications came from Italian presses right through the 16th century. And they are all for a lute with 6 courses, 6 pairs of strings, top string often single. This, if you like, is the classic form of the lute in the 16th century. Towards the end of the century, people started to add more and more strings to the lute. We think this may be due to developments in string technology, amongst other things. And by about 1600 or so, lutes of 9 and sometimes even 10 courses were being used. And the extra strings were all added in the bass. So the original 6 strings are as they are here, but then with an extra set of strings in the bass, giving more scope for playing lower notes and also being able to play lots of notes as open strings rather than as strings stopped on the fingerboard. Lutes had always been made in a variety of sizes, partly because people wanted to use them not just for solo music but for accompanying the voice and other instruments. And towards the end of the 16th century, there was increasing use of the lute in early opera and things which required a very loud lute. And one way to make a lute more brilliant is to take a very large lute but tune it at a very high pitch. But of course that's impossible normally because the top string is already tuned very close to breaking point. So a kind of lute was developed where the top string and sometimes the second string as well were tuned an octave lower than the normal pitch, and that results in a rather strange tuning that we call a re-entrant tuning. Another problem was to get a strong enough bass, and one way to make the bass stronger is to have very long bass strings. And so around the middle of the 1590s, this instrument was developed called a theorbo. It's essentially a bass lute with the re-entrant tuning of the top 2 strings. And it also has long bass strings which go to an upper peg box nearly twice as long as the strings on the fingerboard. So you have really essentially the top 6 strings of the lute and then a series of 8 7 or 8 long bass strings which are played only as open strings, like a harp. They're tuned to a scale so that you can play almost any bass note that you want to play as an open string. By 1600, the lute had not only gained more strings, there was also some experimentation with the tuning. And the French in particular started detuning the upper strings of the lute so that the first string was tuned to a lower pitch than before. And eventually this process led to the development of completely new tunings for the top 6 strings, which gave different resonances to the instrument, and they got very interested in exploring these resonances. This kind of lute developed yet more courses, and the classic French lute of the 17th century has 11 courses. This type of lute was used until around 1700, at which point interest in the lute in France really died out, essentially. And the Germans, or German-speaking countries, took over this lute and added yet more strings to it, and we end up with a 13-course lute by about 1720.